Here we go. Welcome everyone to the Shame, Shame, Shame interactive Zoom workshop. So my name is Joe Walsh. I'm the Family Support Officer for the Rainbow Project. And tonight I'll be speaking with Martin Rolston. He's a counselling manager for the Rainbow Project. And Martin, how many years have you been counselling with the Rainbow Project?
I think it's 12. Yeah, I think it was 12 in July. So mainly counselling, and then becoming a counselling manager, and then doing some training around for counsellors around being LGBT and sort of things they should look out for as counsellors, that sort of thing.
Great. And so you've got a few qualifications, I hear?
Yes. Well, I have my degree and I have my counselling stuff, and then I have bits and pieces of things I did, and they're in there too.
The only letters I can claim to have after my name are parking fines. But thank you for hosting tonight, Martin. And we're going to ask you a few questions based on internalized queerphobia, and that's an umbrella term used for internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. So if you're slightly triggered or annoyed by the word queer, may be a symptom that you may have internalized homophobia or some of those phobias. I know I certainly did and wasn't comfortable using that word. So we'll get on with the first question. And it is, what is internalized queerphobia and how do you know that you have it, Martin?
Okay, well, as you say, queerphobia is an umbrella term, and there are different dynamics in being a man attracted to men, a woman attracted to women, or being bisexual, being attracted to both sexes, or indeed being transgender. But the thing that internalized homophobia, queerphobia, biphobia, or whatever, is that the individual is not feeling safe to be in the world. So if you're not feeling safe to be in the world, you can construct a personality or an image which you feel is safe. But in doing that, you are not going to feel relaxed and free in your everyday world to talk about things that you want to talk about anything. You tend to be what's called a bit hypersensitive. So you are generally tending to police yourself so that you don't say anything wrong, or people don't catch out. So of course that can be pretty exhausting on you as a person, on your mental health, and even on your physical health as well.
Sure.
And in extreme situations that can be traumatic. So for instance, if you're going into a place every day where you're like a job or school or whatever, and you don't feel safe to be the person you are, you're trying to construct an image that's safe. That's going to be exhausting day after day. And then you're going to go home in the evening and sort of say, well, why am I doing this? Why do I have to do this? Why is the world not a better place? And all those questions that we, mess up our head with. Yeah. So that's where the idea of internalized shame comes in.
Brilliant. So the next question, it's a bit of a scenario. So it's when I'm around my straight friends, I don't talk about my lesbian side. Anytime my partner is mentioned, I talk about her as if we're just friends. Why am I afraid to be myself when straight people are around?
Yeah. Well, maybe you have heard the term privilege recently with Black Lives Matter. A lot of people talk about white privilege. So in Rainbow, we would have talked about heterosexual privilege. How is the word constructed? So if the word is constructed from a heterosexual standpoint, where there's certain expectations, you're expected to be in a relationship with someone of the opposite sex. You're expected to present them to your parents or to the end of school celebration, you know, to gain kudos. If you're not doing those things and you don't think you're ever going to do those things, you know, that's going to cause a lot of anxiety. And, you know, another example of privilege would be a straight person never has to come out. You know, you don't have to talk to someone in work and say, you know, by the way, I'm attracted to people of the same sex. I hope you don't mind. No straight person is going to say, you know, I'm attracted to that girl down there. You know, is it a problem for you?
Yeah.
it's not a process that you're going to have to get involved in. So therefore, it's not something you're going to have to worry about. It's not something you're going to have to go home and think about. It's not something you are going to worry about.
Okay, Martin, you're frozen again. Go. Okay, so thank you for that, Martin. The next question is from a gay man, I'm assuming, and he says, when I see a camp or effeminate gay men acting like women, it makes me cringe. It feels like they get everyone in our community a bad name, and we would be accepted by society except for the likes of them. Am I wrong to feel this way?
From my perspective as a gay man who's also a therapist, to me, that feels like we as a sub-community of the queer community, which is the gay community, have taken the stereotype homophobia and internalized it ourselves. So what the parts of us that are only respectable are the parts that mimic male heterosexual society. So we're not allowed to be the full range of masculinity. We're not allowed to do camp, and we are not allowed to do feminine. There's also something else in there, you know, that for many, many years, women were generally repressed. So, you know, that was part of how heterosexual male identity can often come across as crude and macho. So, to some aspects of male heterosexuality, it's abhorrent enough to be gay, but to be gay and to be in touch with your feminine side is just not acceptable. And there's also a danger for a lot of gay men generally, and gay men who are effeminate generally, to express that in the sense of, Freud talked about projective identification, and that's something which someone has inside themselves, but they can never go there because they're so ashamed about it. And so when they see that in someone else, it causes them usually to be angry and to vent that anger. So for instance, that's where you get, you know, homophobic attacks and homophobic aggression as well. But it is basically a view that it's not allowed for males to express their feminine side, and it is certainly not socially acceptable for gay men to express their feminine side. And often as a minority group, we can internalize the stereotypes of the majority group.
Thank you, Martin. That's really interesting. So just a wee question next, Martin, about sexual abuse and the shame that can come with that. So it says, I was sexually abused as a child before the age of consent. I felt shame after this and I blamed myself. In my adulthood, I thought the feelings would go away, but they're present every time I have sex. How can I stop feeling like this? So would that be a common thing, Martin, in terms of people being sexually abused, to bring that?
Yeah, well, Yeah, I mean, sexual abuse is really common in all communities. It's something that was really underreported in Northern Ireland because of the political situation. So after that sort of calmed down, it was only then that you got all the sort of abuse scandals. I mean, regarding the question as such, sexual abuse is a trauma, and we tend to react to traumas with the fight, flight, freeze, flop, which is play dead, or there's a fifth one people don't really talk about often, which is friend. Sometimes, somebody can, in order to try and save themselves, be a friend to their abuser as well, but it's generally fight, flight, or freeze. And that's a trauma reaction, and we get stuck in that reaction if the trauma happens time and time and time again. So as an adult, if you haven't really dealt with that with a good therapist over time, then you can often, when presented with the same situation, go into that trauma response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. So you can have people when they're first experimenting with dating and sex and stuff like that, just go, that was too much, I'm out of here, or else they get very anxious when they're having sex, and they get a sort of, oh, I can't perform, and maybe performance anxiety. Or that they are afraid to explore sex and explore what they like. So it's almost like a freeze reaction. It's like something that is, you go there and somebody else makes all the choices and all the decisions, and you just sort of like appear or something. So it is a trauma, and for gay people, it's a trauma on top of another trauma. So for instance, if you are a gay man who's been sexually abused, then you have the dilemma of being attracted to the gender that abused you. And of course, it's not just men who abuse, women abuse as well. So it could be a similar thing for a lesbian growing up, where she's attracted, trying to come to terms with the fact that she's attracted to other women. And also she has bad memories of women in general and doesn't feel safe with women in general. So it can be a bit of a double whammy. And often it's really confusing. It's just like, I've got this problem, I'm young, I'm gay, I'm lesbian or whatever. I should be out there having fun. We're supposed to be really sexual and really fabulous and amazing and partying all night, every night, especially at 20 or something. And actually, people who have that trauma just find it all too much, but they can't really understand why they find it too much.
And then some people may think that they're gay or bisexual because of the abuse.
Yes, and that's a really funny one. I have had a few people over the years, mostly men, who have been abused, and they have said, I often wonder if I'm really gay or really bisexual, and I wonder, is it the fact that I have been abused? And all I say to them is that, I've been working as a counsellor for 12 years, and I've done private practice, and I've worked for other organisations as well as Rainbow. I've never come out of work and their abuser is of the same gender as who they're attracted to. It can be a confusing thing, and being gay is not an easy path, so it really belies that thing that sometimes people of different faiths can say, oh, it's a choice. But if you ask most people, in my opinion, it's not an easy path and they wouldn't choose it. And I think sometimes there, with sexual abuse as well, it's, well, if sexual abuse made me gay, maybe I can find my inner heterosexual and then everything will be a lot easier.
Yeah.
There would be some of that too.
Thank you, Martin. a trans question now. This is from a trans person, and they have said, I'm trans and I find it difficult to socialize or make friends. I've attended social groups for the LGBT community, but it was an uncomfortable experience. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. Is that internalized transphobia?
There can be two things going on there. One of them is low self-esteem through internalized transphobia, or generally we can talk about it as internalized shame. I mean, it does affect one's mental health. And one of the questions that you can carry around with yourself, am I good enough? You know, do I look good enough? Am I intelligent enough? Am I, you know, attractive enough? Can I make good enough conversation? You know, in this situation, it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy, or sort of prophecy, sorry, where the person does in their heart doesn't feel good enough, and they're creating a situation outside of themselves in the outside world, you know, where they're making that happen and not having insight into how they're making it happen. So yes, it can be internalized shame again, and this time, you know, internalized transphobia. And it's funny that, you know, this person is saying, I don't feel comfortable in my own skin, which many people maybe have said. But of course, it has special resonance for a trans person, because literally they, at different times in their life and in their journey of self-acceptance, they haven't felt comfortable in their own skin. So for instance, if you are taking on board the journey of a trans woman, you know, who is coming to terms that before she transitions, you know, when she's still as male, she may not like the skin she's in, she may not like the hair on her skin, you know, she might not like the musculature under her skin.
Yeah.
You know, so there is two things about that. But definitely there is that whole idea of internalized shame. And when the internalized shame is very, very great, it then becomes traumatic. And we then look for ways to get away from life, to isolate, to
Cope.
to cope and to prove to ourselves, you know, that what we think is true, that we're not likable or we're not lovable.
Yeah, because the ego has to prove whatever it is that you're thinking in order to stay identified.
Yeah.
Okay. Question 6. I am a gay man and I would never have sex with a bisexual man because I feel that they are not fully gay and somehow they betray the cause. It's because of them that Christians think sexual orientation is a choice. So
Yeah.
bisexuals are the bodies.
Bisexuals are the bodies. I mean, that the end of the statement about, you know, that's why Christians think, you know, are one of the reasons we have a bad rapport or bad name with Christians. I think that can be justified first, because it doesn't matter whether you're bisexual, lesbian, gay, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, it's a person with extreme views. You believe that the norm is heterosexual, you're for. So, you know,
Sorry, Martin, we're losing you again.
Generally, the statistics say that bisexual people get more abuse in a way. They get a thing of lack of trust from the gay community. But all the research also shows that bisexuality very much does exist. And some of the extra ways that we can oppress our bisexual brothers and sisters is, you know, for instance, one therapist who's bisexual told me that when she goes out with a woman, she is referred to as a gay woman, and when she goes out with a man, she's referred to as heterosexual. Now that is really quite hurtful for her, because she doesn't change her sexual orientation. with every person she goes out with. She's the same sexual orientation. Other people will describe bisexuality as it's who I love, you know, and I can love a man intimately and I can love a woman intimately. So the research is clear, bisexuality very much does exist. And there's also a fair bit of information that it makes some gay men and gay women uncomfortable. Now that might be to do with the fact that they have gone through a very long and sometimes painful process to come out, and they think that other people are taking an easier option. And to some degree, some people may choose bisexuality before coming out as gay or lesbian, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there are bisexual people in the world.
Great.
And there's even more confusion for those people who want everything just black and white, that it's not black and white, that some people have actually, as they've grown older, have become more bisexual and less gay. So sexual orientation can even change a little over time.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's good.
So it's not all over to the fat lady sings, as they say.
Yep, you never know what's going to
You
happen
never
in the
know.
future. So the next one is about embarrassment. When I see two men have sex on TV, I feel embarrassed. Even if I'm alone, I think my parents could see this. So what's going on there with that? They're thinking two men having sex on TV and their parents could be watching, so that's causing embarrassment and shame.
Yeah. Well, again, it's that sort of thing of internalized homophobia and being ashamed of who you are. And, you know, that starts at school, you know, where you are beginning to question yourself, what's acceptable for me to be in school, a place I need to feel safe in every day, and I don't feel safe. And sometimes I want the ground to open up and swallow me, you know, if people start, you know, slagging me off for possibly being gay. So the last thing you're going to talk about is sex. Right. Because you're going to be afraid that if you talk about sex the way other teenagers talk about sex, that you're automatically going to be slagged off as the gay boy or the lesbo or whatever.
Yeah, because it's different.
And you don't want to give yourself any more pain than you already have. You know, so you know, you 10 years later,
you're still doing it.
You're still doing it in a way. Maybe you have reimagined yourself, and you've had some same-sex relationships. But have you really tackled the deep insecurities and the deep shame at your core? And are you still carrying some of the self that you created in order to be safe? You know, and in that way, you're looking through that, those eyes, and you're saying, well, you know, there's a certain amount of this gay lifestyle that's acceptable, and it's going to be acceptable to my parents, it's going to be acceptable to my friends and workmates. And I'm one of those good gays who is acceptable, and I'm not one of those bad gays who do naughty things and give us a bad reputation.
Yeah, so you can sanitize your entire relationship and your entire existence just to make it palatable for heterosexual people or religious people, if you've got religious parents. But it all comes back to shame still.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
We've lost video. I think we can still hear you okay. No, it's gone. And we're recording again. So last question that we have here for Martin is, everyone says I'm good with children and I should have my own family. I'm worried what people will think of me when I look into this. and later, when the child is at school, that they will be bullied. So I had a bit of this whenever I was younger, about 16. I went to be trained in childcare, and I was worried that people might think that I was a paedophile, because what would a young man want to be working with children for? So I think that might be where that question was kind of headed. And
Yeah.
then the other part is when the child is in school, if they had same-sex parents, they're going to be bullied.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand your experience, Joe, and there's been so much discrimination thrown at, gay men and lesbians over the years about being perverts, really, just because of your sexual orientation. And then that general stereotype for an even smaller minority would be extended to perverts and, child abusers. But like everything else, things have changed, and laws have changed. So that civil partnership, civil or marriage, and then adoption and
Fostering and all.
fostering and different types of being a family have become more normal, really, and people are just doing it anyway, and lots of people are doing it. So in every major city, you're going to have lots of gay parents, and so there's support now where there was never before. And as you know yourself, because you were one of the main people in Rainbow who did the family support service, where you're working with parents and you're working with children. Rainbow supply counselling for individuals and couples, but they don't provide family therapy, but they do family support. So there's always support available for parents. You can't deny that it might be more difficult. You might be unlucky enough to get a homophobic neighbour who creates a bit of trouble for you, but most of the time, for most of the people, actually their experience is quite good. And I suppose if you're going to bring children into the world or adopt children, you're going to be thinking about your finances and where you live and stuff like that. So no matter who you are, if you were going to bring kids into the world, you wouldn't want to be living, next door to somebody who's partying all night and taking loads of drugs. You're going to be preparing yourself to create a good home for a family, and you're going to do some research. You're going to have a good idea of schools that are friendly to LGBT parents and stuff like that. And that information is now available from other LGBT parents and from LGBT organizations. I've seen a number of interviews with teenage LGBT kids who have, or sorry, kids of heterosexual kids, but of LGBT parents, who have said that they would not have done anything, they wouldn't have wished their lives to be any different. And I think that was because their parents were concerned that they might have a difficult time. And so they went above and beyond the call of duty to talk with the head teachers of the school, to have good relationships with their neighbours, to make sure their children were well loved and, had a good friendship support group. So the parents usually go above and beyond the call of duty to make sure their children feel where they have good self-image and are confident people in the world and have the best opportunities.
That's right, yes. As we're working in family support, during 5 years, we connected with just over 100 families, and the feedback was mainly good. I mean, the purpose of the family support group was for them to meet up so that children could normalize their family. But I suppose shame is just one extra barrier to becoming a same-sex parent. I think we've lost Martin again. Thank you. So just to get around the technical difficulties, we've got Martin on the phone, and I'm just going to check out here. Helen has asked a question in the chat, and she was looking more on the friend reaction, and she said it's not well talked about, but we all know about the fight or flight. And I've asked her, does she mean how friends react to you coming out? And I don't know what she means, but I'm sure she'll get back to us. Okay. Okay, so Martin thinks he might be able to. There, he's back again.
You'll definitely need a good editor now, Joe. That little awkward
Yes.
one. What were you on the phone for? Were you trying to do a double connection?
So, does anyone have a question for Martin that they would like to ask him directly?
Yeah, do you accept pity?
Right now, yeah.
Yes, we've had a bad time with technology this time.
I have questions, but I'll let other people go first. Anyone?
So Kieran has asked, how can you get rid of shame?
I mean, it is a long process when you think of the number of years, probably from you were about 4 or 5 years old when you started sort of hiding part of yourself that you didn't feel safe with, you know, and maybe you're 20 or 30 or whatever when you begin to realize that it's affecting your life in a negative way and you want to do something with it. So it's a long process, and it's usually a process where, you know, a good counselor will be able to help you in a way to reframe a lot of experiences where you thought you were to blame or you were wrong or you were bad or whatever. So a good counselor will help you to relook at things and let you see what was going on in your life, you know, that you had very few choices to do anything else because maybe your safety was compromised, maybe your family relationships were compromised, you know, maybe just you felt compromised, you know, you didn't feel strong enough to be who you were. So there's a process of self-forgiveness, a building of self-trust, because when you go through a process of shame, one of the things that goes is the trust in making the right decision for you. So you have to sort of learn to trust yourself again. So it can be quite a long process.
And first of all, Martin, recognizing that the shame is there initially, because a lot of people don't know that it's there. They just know that they feel bad and they don't know why. And it's only until you start to look into things and get a bit of counseling that you become aware.
Yeah, you know, and then it can become a process in the end where a lot of people, you know, who've worked through a lot of the stuff to get to like themselves can look back and think, you know, well, that was hard, but, you know, I really like the person I am now.
Okay, Helen was talking about shame with friends in relation to the trauma and abuse. So again, that has to be dealt with. It's not going to go away by itself. You can't leave things to go away over time. Has to be.
Yeah. I again, you know, I think it really helps to get a good start on a recovery, you know, by using a counselor or a therapist, because you're sort of trying to get insight into yourself about, you know, why you're unhappy. And sometimes it's harder for us to see ourselves as other people see us. And often when we are unhappy, we're very hard on ourselves. You know, we're calling ourselves stupid, we're calling ourselves.
And the question is, can we talk about the impact of shame and not really seeing yourself represented on TV? growing up or being the punchline of jokes. So invisibility.
Yeah, I think internalized homophobia is not really represented on TV, and you know, it's a tricky subject. And I suppose I would imagine, you know, series writers and film writers and stuff like that are probably afraid of misrepresenting LGBT people.
Right. So you don't see it very often.
So they're not really tackling, you know, how internalized homophobia can be a trauma or how it can seriously affect your mental health, because it's quite a complex subject, you know. In a way, parallel to that, you know, there's not many TV series which tackle long-term effects of sexual abuse, because it's a complex, you know, a complex subject. And I suppose maybe people are maybe afraid of getting it wrong, or they just don't want to go there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin.
But I think there's hope for that as well, in the sense of, you know, people are talking a lot more about ethnic diversity and racism, which is another form of minority repression and minority abuse. So maybe, you know, on the backlog of that, more people will talk about, you know, the abuse of sexual orientation and gender minorities.
So it might be changing in the future.
Yeah, it might be changing. Yeah.
If I may, just for a small amount of elaboration, what are we supposed to make of the examples that we do see anywhere, be it online or on television? I've referenced America in the chat there, and I'm not picking solely on America, but it definitely didn't do a tremendous job for representing trans folks all that well, and still doesn't.
Yeah. It's been a lot of invisibility with UK and America, but also a lot of good work as well. There's just maybe not as widely publicized. I mean, Queer as Folk was groundbreaking for its time and shocking to a lot of people. There was gay sex on Channel 4 and lesbians having a baby, and you know, a lot that was groundbreaking for its time. So I suppose it's
usually Looking was an American series, which also was pretty groundbreaking, you know, and it was done in the noughties. It was a HBO series, but again, there was, you know, gay men involved in the writing of it. And as regards trans issues, there's a great documentary on Netflix called Disclosure, which is led by trans men and trans women, and it is really sensitively and well done.
okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
There are you doing a wrap up now? I do have 2 questions.
Yep, go ahead.
Martin had mentioned whenever it had come to, what is it, question? Yes, here we are. Whenever it had come to embarrassment over sex, and you had mentioned the element of peer pressure in schools, that's where we have quite an awful lot of the youngest and pre-pubescence issues is from our peers in class. So what are the means of trying to tackle something like that? We already are aware of LGBT education, but what about the other one that was supposed to be there in the first place, like sex education?
That's complicated in Northern Ireland. Our schools aren't covered under Section 75 of the Equality Act. So schools can, in effect, choose to ignore LGBT people's existence. A lot of them do for religious reasons because they have a religious ethos. And also a lot of them do simply because they are afraid to tackle it. They don't know how. But it is changing in that they are reaching out to organisations like the Rainbow Project and Cara Friend. Cara Friend do a lot of work with schools. on education, especially around trans pupils and accommodating young pupils transitioning in schools, which can be very difficult. What isn't great, but it is changing. It's certainly different from when I was there.
Okay. The only other question I have is, it's sort of a big one, and it might be a complicated one to answer. Whenever it comes to showing solidarity in the world, we can easily be put up on a very scary stage. I mean, we've seen what's been happening in Central Europe, and then before that, we've seen what happened in far Eastern Europe in Russia, and the tremendous prejudices that were allowed to be tolerated in there and are surfacing up in the likes of Poland and Hungary. How best can we tackle things like this? Should we know our information and be familiar with our institutions? Can we do a lot more than that?
Awareness, yeah. Awareness of organizations like Rainbow Railroad. They evacuate LGBT people, and so you can donate to them, or you can just spread awareness of those organizations that are helping. But it wasn't so long ago that this country was in need of that, and we really just had to burst out from the center, from the grassroots, and fight our way out, which is what sadly LGBT people have to do all over the world. But there are different ways you can support. If there's charities that are offering services or have a donate facility on Amazon, small things like that.
I know of a few YouTube channels that do that, like Powered by Rainbows is one of them. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Nigel, thank you. Anyone else got any questions before we wrap up?
I don't have any questions, but I'd just like to make a comment, if I may. Is that okay?
Certainly.
Actually, I might have a question at the end of it. I just want to thank you both, Martin and yourself, for bringing this to the Zoom and having this meeting. I hope that we would have a little bit more sometime soon, because it's quite a deep and wide subject matter, and particularly around shame. And from my own personal perspective, I'm from I got aware of shame and its destruction very, very young and very early on in my life through what we call toxic shame, which is another type of shame. I was born into an alcoholic family, so I basically am going through the process of recovery. And then I had the shame again on a different level for being gay and coming out and all of that. So it's just such a huge area, and it caused me a lot of difficulties in my 20s and 30s. I was fortunate, though. I got counselling when I was in my 20s for both anxiety and depression, which I think was definitely a result of the toxic shame that I found in my family. But thankfully, I learned all about toxic shame at a very early age through my therapy and through recovery and groups like Al-Anon and groups for kids, Alateen, which were based around the whole circle of alcoholic dysfunction in families, and that overlapped into my life as a gay man as well, because I had to deal with gay abuse and gay intolerance at a very early age. So the understanding that I got from therapy and from counselling really helped me. And I just want to say basically that I would love to see more of this. I'd love to take part in more of this. And if that's a possibility, then that would be terrific, because this is quite a deep subject. It's quite deep and it's quite broad. But I'm really pleased that attending this meeting tonight, and I'm really happy, even with the gremlins and the technical problems, that we had this platform and this this connection. Because one of the things you learn in psychology and in counselling, that to deal with shame, you've got to have connection. You've got to bring the subject into the light. You've got to unhook the subject from the shame and the guilt, which are two different aspects. And then you've got to make connections, and connecting with other people and talking about your shame and talking about your history is extremely important. And it was extremely important for me, and it still is, even at this late stage in my evolution. I'm still dealing with shame-based problems in my teens, with my alcoholic dysfunctional family, and then as a gay man in my 20s and 30s and 40s in work and different scenarios. So it's an incredibly important subject, this, and I'm really, really happy and full of gratitude to have this opportunity to listen to Martin and his experience and his knowledge, and I hope there's more going forward. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you for your input, CJ. If I might give an extension as well, I don't really want to speak on behalf of everyone, but I'm particularly thankful that you are also hosting these events, Joe and Martin. It's not just that this is information, and you cannot overvalue information at all in this modern age, but it's also the necessity of these events as well. Without these events, we would be none the wiser, and we would be at hardly any position to help solve issues like this.
That's right. I mean, shame is something that has touched us all at some part of our lives. It's what connects us, and we often found it difficult in the past to present workshops like this because it's difficult to get people to talk about it. But they were always packaged as internalized homophobia, and the graphics were all people being broken and damaged. And when people saw that, it looked like they didn't want to be a part of it because it didn't look like it was very healing. But that's why we've repackaged it and we've brought it out into the light. Really, it's good to talk about shame. We need to talk about it. It has hurt us. It's still in the deepest parts of us, and it's a journey and a process. And counsellors like Martin and an amazing team here at Rainbow of counsellors are on standby if anybody needs counselling at all. And Helen, you had a wee question there about dealing with your friend's reaction after trauma and abuse.
That particular reaction, we know a lot about flight or fright, whatever you want to call it, but that friend one is just of particular interest to myself, and as just was wondering, just, you know, how does that manifest itself? How does that, mainly after, like, say, trauma?
How your friends deal with you?
No, the friend reaction. So, or there's flight, there's fright, there's friend. Those three reactions. We know about two.
The lesser known of the three.
Yes. Just sort of how that particular reaction manifests.
Okay, Martin, can you answer that one?
I just need a wee bit more clarity. It's about how fight or flight manifests in the adult. But was there another part of that? Was it a particular aspect of fight or flight or a particular situation?
It's more, you know, you said that the friend was sort of in the same category as flight or fright.
And the last one was friend.
Fight or flight usually happens as a reaction to an emergency. So if you imagine someone being bullied at school, that will seem like an emergency because you're under threat. So fight or flight will happen, and all these hormones will go into process to make you run away, to fight.
But the friend reaction, as in the lesser known reaction, which is the same category as flight or fright, can manifest. That is sort of, how does that reaction, say as a result of trauma, something happened or whatever, and you befriended the person instead of going for flight or fright?
So yes, instead of fight or flight, Martin, becoming friends with the person as a way to protect with the abuser.
Yes, you have it now. You have it now.
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. Yes, becoming friends with the abuser as a method of self-preservation.
Yes,
Yes.
that's what I was doing all along. I don't think I was doing too well, right?
Yeah. So that can be common.
And it's, you know, the old saying about keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Some people will get so close to the enemy that the enemy protects them.
Right. So it's all about self-preservation and staying safe or as safe as you can, and yeah.
Each part of the fight or flight, freeze, flop, friend, whatever it is you're doing, it's usually in order to surviving and stay alive and stay safe. But what happens is then as an adult, different situations, maybe going to a gay club because it's highly sexualized, maybe going on a date, maybe people talking about something that was on TV last night and had gay characters. Things trigger those old feelings, and therefore we get that old reaction again.
What about affection or love for the abuser? Would that also fall into it? And is that a complicated one?
Good question.
Affection or love for the abuser, Martin?
Well, it is a more complex thing because you know, sexual abuse is an issue of its own, and it's a very complex issue which has a load of aspects. But there is that possibility, you know, for instance, like when someone has been, you know, in America over the years, there has been men who've abducted young women. In the Middle East, there has been terrorists who've abducted journalists and stuff like that. There seems to be a point in a long process where the person that has been abused or abducted or whatever can almost feel pity and sorrow, and which can lead to a sort of affection.
Yep.
I'm shocked.
It tends to happen over a long time when something's been going on for a long time.
Yes, yes. I'm jotting down reading material as well. To help extend Helen's question, is there any further reading for a subject like this, fight, flight, but especially friend, that we can look up?
We can put together a wee list, maybe, Martin?
Yes. One of the seminal books on internalized homophobia is called The Velvet Rage by Alan Downes. It was written in the end of the 20th century, but it's been reprinted so many times because often gay men and women too, but especially gay men because it's written by a man, can just read it and think, oh my God, that's me. And it goes into the levels of internalized homophobia and how they affect you at different ages when you're trying to come to terms with who you are and be happy in your life. So that's The Velvet Rage by Alan Downes. As regards trans issues and low self-esteem through the process of accepting yourself as a trans man or woman, I will heartily recommend Disclosure on Netflix right now. And some of the greatest novelists for lesbians were, again, in the last century, Jeanette Winterson, The Passion, and Oranges or Lemons Are Not the Only Fruit, I can't remember. And there's great series like Tipping the Velvet, Gentleman Jack, The Making of Gentleman Jack.
Great. We will. We'll try and get
you started.
Yes, we'll try and get a wee list together, and we can email those around.
Can I ask just one last question?
Certainly.
Do you think maybe with more normalization of LGBT issues and the fact I'm thinking for future generations, may they be less likely to suffer from internalized homophobia? I mean, when I was growing up, for example, I'm 60, I actually, if I found myself attracted by same sex, I actually wouldn't have had the vocabulary to explain that or to identify with what that would be. So I would appreciate that would feel shameful. But I'm a grandmother now, and when you have grandchildren or a baby, you assume that baby to be cisgender and you presume them to be heterosexual, rightly or wrongly, but that is your presumption. But they may not be. And I want my grandchildren to grow up in a world where it doesn't matter. So for me, I feel it's education, normalization of these things. And I guess what I'm asking is, if that were the case, is there the hope that future generations may not suffer the awful internalized homophobia and transphobia that, you know, previous generations have had? I mean, I think we have made huge leaps. I've been an LGBT activist for, say, 15 years. And in that time, we have made huge leaps forward. But is there the possibility that with more education that actually the transphobia and the homophobia could actually be obsolete, a thing of the past? Or is it much more complicated than that?
Well, my view of it is that there are always haters in the world, you know, people who most likely have not dealt with their own issues. However, relatively, as each generation progresses, people suffer less through repression of minority groups. People have more help and support, not only from community support like the Rainbow Project, but you can't miss the things that are on TV, you know, the wonderful documentaries, the wonderful films that are made by LGBT film directors, producers, you know, and some of the groundbreaking TV series. So, you know, you can see a reflection of who you are more quickly these days than you could do years ago. And that just means that you go searching for people like you, and you go searching on the internet for stories of people like you, and you know that, you know, the world's out there and it's waiting for you, and it is definitely a better place than, you know, the world you described.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think nobody handed us our rights. We had to fight for them.
Absolutely.
Out there and take them. And through protest and celebration and pride and everything else. And that's always the way it has to be. Nobody's going to hand you your freedoms. You have to fight for them. And as long as that continues, we'll keep battling on.
Well, listen, ultimate respect to all you guys for everything that you have done and making the world a better place and sharing your stories, because, you know, I think too, you need straight allies, and I'm really, really happy to be that. And I mean, we need educated, we need to understand, and I thank you for sharing your stories, because it goes to your very core, and that cannot be easy to do. So I am humbled, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for tonight. And in spite of the technical hiccups, it did not bother the whole event at all. Thank you. Thank you for staying with it.
Thank you so much.
Una or Una, is it? How do you prefer your name to be called?
You can say it whatever way you like, but in 1960, I think I was named after Una Stubbs, so it's Una.
Una, we can go a step further than that. I have to give an extension of me and you being in the same boat, because you said that you're 60. Thank you for making sure that I don't ask you that. I don't, but I'm not a traditionalist. I would have asked you anyway. But I'm 27, and I faced the exact same issues as you did. It was really a matter of lack of information, disinformation, malinformation. There was never any accessibility or ease of trying to answer the questions anyway. And that's precisely why I was driven to try and look for things a lot more deeper. And you are absolutely right. We have come a long way. Belfast Pride, for example, got bigger and better every year before COVID. Yeah.
No, I can remember when it was only 100 people running around the city hall and doing. Now it's, you know, what does it take about an hour to leave?
We have an army now.
Yes.
Massive now.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's super.
But it's up to us as a community. We have to keep fighting and keep making sure that things don't roll back.
Yeah.
Information and participation is
Onwards and
everything.
upwards.
Yes, and get straight allies, get
Straight
everyone
allies,
in.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I'm happy to be with you guys.
Likewise.
Any more questions? Going once, twice?